You think you know everyone in your family. Think again, Helen whispered to George as they stepped cautiously onto the quiet suburban street, their worn coats and tired shoes making them look every bit the part of a homeless couple. And for a moment, the crisp morning air felt heavier than usual, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant barbecue smoke from the neighbors' yards. But their focus was entirely on the house just ahead, where Samantha, the daughter-in-law they had quietly resented for years, was about to walk past. And Helen couldn't help but remember the countless small slights, the subtle disrespect, the way Samantha's smiles never quite reached her eyes when addressing Helen. And George squeezed her hand reassuringly, a silent reminder that this plan was theirs to carry out together, a playful but pointed test of character. And as they neared the front door, Helen adjusted the scarf around her neck and tried to suppress a smile, thinking about how Samantha would react. Whether curiosity or irritation would get the better of her, they positioned themselves strategically, leaning against the low brick wall with a cardboard sign that read, "Just trying to survive," a small, almost comical prop that somehow made their hearts race with anticipation. And as the minutes ticked by, the sound of Samantha's footsteps grew closer, each tap on the sidewalk amplifying the tension. Her eyes catching the sight of them for the first time, a flash of recognition, mixed with confusion crossing her face, and Helen and George exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Years of experience in reading people condensed into a single moment of triumph and suspense. And when Samantha finally paused, eyebrows raised, Helen whispered to George that this was it, the moment their quiet experiment would reveal the truth. And George nodded, his own lips curling into a subtle grin, knowing that whatever happened next, the family dynamics would never be quite the same again. And just as Samantha stepped closer, hesitant but undeniably intrigued, Helen felt a thrill at the thought of the revelation yet to come, the clever twist they had engineered ready to unfold, leaving every second pregnant with suspense. And the street seemed to hold its breath as the elderly couple prepared to see how Samantha would respond, testing the boundaries of kindness, empathy, and genuine concern in a way that was both intimate and revealing. And Helen silently promised herself that no matter the outcome, they had taken control of the narrative, turning years of quiet frustration into a single moment of insight and unexpected clarity. As Samantha stood frozen for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob, Helen and George exchanged a quiet glance, the kind that carried decades of shared understanding and patience. And in that brief pause, the air seemed thick with unspoken questions and years of unnoticed slights, while Samantha hesitated, glancing back at her own home, wondering silently if she should act on the curiosity tugging at her. And then slowly, almost reluctantly, she turned the knob, the door creaking softly, as it opened to reveal Helen and George, whose eyes met hers with a mixture of amusement and quiet challenge. And as she stepped inside, the familiar scent of the house mingled with the faint hint of autumn leaves from outside, grounding her in a setting she thought she knew completely. While the couple remained composed, every gesture deliberate and calm, inviting Samantha to confront her own reactions without a word. And in that stillness, Samantha could not help but notice the careful way Helen had arranged a small, welcoming area by the couch, a subtle contrast to their disheveled appearance outside, emphasizing the depth of thought behind this test. And George offered a gentle nod, silently communicating the stakes of this unexpected scenario, a test of character rather than circumstance. And Samantha shifted uneasily, realizing that the couple she had quietly judged in the past were the ones controlling the pace and the lesson of the moment, their quiet authority drawing her attention to her own behavior and choices. And Helen spoke softly, her voice steady. "We wanted to see who would notice what really matters." And the words hung in the room, revealing a layer of insight Samantha had not anticipated. And as she absorbed the message, the subtle weight of responsibility for her actions and attitudes began to settle on her. The reality of her own self-interest juxtaposed with the patience and composure of the couple. And for the first time, she felt the tension of years of superficial judgments dissolve into a genuine reflection on kindness and attentiveness. And Helen and George maintained their calm demeanor, never raising their voices or forcing any conclusion, allowing the lesson to unfold naturally as Samantha wrestled internally with her responses and the small, revealing choices she had made in the past. and through this measured interaction, the room seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, a moment suspended in time, compelling Samantha to consider not only how she treated others, but also how she could act differently in the future. And every movement, glance, and pause within that living room was meticulously orchestrated to illuminate truth and empathy, creating an experience that was at once intimate and profound, leaving Samantha to quietly ponder the larger implications of her behavior while Helen and George observed with a serene patience that spoke louder than any words could. And as the conversation continued, subtle smiles and nods exchanged between the elderly couple reinforced the depth of their wisdom and the gentle power of an unspoken but undeniable authority, setting the stage for lessons that extended far beyond the walls of the home, inviting reflection and anticipation for what would unfold next. Samantha took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the living room, noticing small details she had never paid attention to before, the way the sunlight fell across the hardwood floors, highlighting the care and thought Helen and George had put into their home. And in that moment, she began to see a side of them she had ignored for too long, the patience in Helen's gestures, the quiet support George offered without a word. And as they spoke calmly about small, everyday matters, Samantha felt a subtle shift within herself, a mix of curiosity and unease, realizing that the couple had orchestrated this entire situation to teach a lesson without confrontation. And every polite smile, every careful nod, every quiet comment was a thread in a larger tapestry of insight and reflection, and she could not help but recall moments from past family gatherings, times when she had dismissed Helen's advice or overlooked George's kindness, moments that now felt heavier with meaning. And as Helen offered her a cup of warm tea, a small gesture that conveyed both comfort and observation, Samantha felt a twinge of humility, understanding that true wisdom often came with gentleness, rather than loud proclamation. And George mentioned a minor incident from a week ago, not to scold, but to illustrate thoughtfulness. And Samantha's mind replayed her reactions, her impatience, her fleeting frustrations, all now viewed in the light of this carefully guided scenario. And she realized that the couple had created a space where honesty and reflection could occur naturally, without shame or aggression, allowing her to recognize her own patterns while feeling neither attacked nor judged. And the room seemed to hold a quiet energy, a tension filled with learning, as Helen and George shared subtle smiles and supportive gestures that encouraged Samantha to engage with her own conscience. And she noticed the meticulous way the couple had positioned the furniture, the cozy throw blankets, the warm lighting, all designed to make their home feel safe, yet introspective, and every detail seemed intentional, a quiet strategy to help Samantha confront her actions and thoughts. And as they discussed everyday topics, the conversation flowed smoothly, yet beneath the surface lay a profound lesson about empathy, awareness, and the impact of small choices. And Samantha began to appreciate the depth of consideration that Helen and George had invested in creating this moment, the blend of playfulness, intelligence, and patience teaching her without force. And by the time the afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the floor, Samantha could feel the beginnings of change. Within herself, a recognition of the couple's quiet authority, the strength of their wisdom, and a newfound understanding that relationships were shaped not only by grand gestures, but by the careful, consistent thoughtfulness that Helen and George had exemplified throughout this intricate, revealing encounter. As the conversation between Helen, George, and Samantha continued, a subtle shift began to emerge in the atmosphere, with Samantha gradually lowering her defenses and showing signs of genuine curiosity, her posture relaxing slightly as she engaged more thoughtfully with the couple, noticing the gentle care in their movements and the deliberate pacing of their words. And Helen, with a calm and steady voice, shared small stories from the past, moments that highlighted patience, empathy, and resilience without casting blame, inviting Samantha to reflect on her own behavior rather than feeling attacked. And George chimed in occasionally, offering quiet insights that reinforced the lessons through lived experience, creating a rhythm of dialogue that felt natural yet charged with introspection. And Samantha began to connect these narratives to her recent actions, the times she had dismissed Helen's guidance or overlooked George's subtle support, each recollection adding weight to the unfolding understanding. And as the afternoon sun continued to filter through the windows, casting warm golden light across the room, the space seemed to encourage openness, each corner and piece of furniture contributing to an environment that was both inviting and thought-provoking. And Samantha noticed the careful arrangement of objects, the presence of familiar scents, the sense of home that Helen and George had meticulously maintained, and the realization dawned that this entire scenario had been designed to teach her through observation and participation, not confrontation, and she felt a mixture of surprise, respect, and a dawning sense of accountability, understanding that her previous judgments had been hasty and often superficial. And as she responded to Helen's gentle prompts and George's quiet affirmations, she could feel the tension of past misunderstandings easing, replaced by a growing awareness of the value of empathy, attentiveness, and conscious decision-making in daily interactions. And Helen and George continued to guide the moment with patience and subtlety, never rushing, never pressuring, allowing Samantha to arrive at her own conclusions, while reinforcing the importance of observation, reflection, and thoughtful engagement. And the room, filled with the soft sounds of conversation, the occasional clink of a teacup, and the warmth of afternoon light, became a space of learning and subtle revelation, each action and word carefully orchestrated to encourage self-awareness and insight, leaving Samantha with a deeper understanding of the couple's intentions, their quiet authority, and the profound lessons embedded in the ordinary moments of life, all unfolding with a gentle yet undeniable clarity that promised continued growth and reflection. As the afternoon continued to unfold, Samantha found herself increasingly attentive to Helen and George, noticing not only their words but the subtle ways they moved and interacted with the home around them, the gentle care in arranging items, the small gestures that revealed decades of shared experience and patience. And with each observation, Samantha felt a quiet shift within her, a recognition of the depth of thought and intentionality behind every detail, and she began to reflect on her own behavior in the family, recalling moments when she had acted out of convenience or impatience rather than genuine consideration. And Helen spoke softly about the importance of noticing what truly matters in everyday life, the seemingly small acts of kindness, attention, and support that often go unnoticed but have profound impact over time. And George added his perspective, sharing stories of how consistent care and understanding had shaped their own relationships and strengthened their family bonds. And Samantha listened closely, feeling a mix of humility and insight, realizing that the couple had created a situation that allowed her to observe, consider, and internalize lessons in a way that was both gentle and unmistakably clear. And as they moved through the room together, engaging in simple tasks and light conversation, Samantha began to see herself not as a critic or an observer, but as a participant in a larger pattern of family life, one where attentiveness, patience, and empathy were essential. And the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the windows, the soft hum of the air conditioning, and the quiet presence of Helen and George all contributed to an environment conducive to reflection and learning. And as she continued to interact with them, the subtle messages became increasingly apparent, the ways in which small, thoughtful actions conveyed more than words ever could. And Samantha felt a growing sense of accountability and understanding, recognizing that her previous attitudes had often overlooked the value of deliberate, considerate behavior, and she began to internalize the lessons, thinking about how she might approach future interactions differently. And Helen and George, ever composed, allowed her the space to arrive at these realizations naturally, reinforcing the idea that wisdom and insight often emerge most powerfully in environments of patience, respect, and gentle guidance. And by the time the late afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the room, Samantha was experiencing a profound awareness of the importance of mindful engagement, attentiveness, and the quiet power of thoughtful action. And the atmosphere, rich with warmth, subtle energy, and the interplay of observation and reflection, left her contemplating not only her relationship with Helen and George, but the broader patterns of understanding and empathy that shape all meaningful connections. By the time the late afternoon had settled into early evening, Samantha felt an unfamiliar sense of stillness within herself, a quiet reflection that contrasted sharply with her usual restless energy. And as Helen and George moved about the living room, adjusting cushions and straightening small items with deliberate care, Samantha noticed the subtle ways they communicated without words: a glance, a nod, a slight tilt of the head conveying understanding and shared history, and she realized that these small gestures were far more telling than anything she had previously observed in the family dynamic. And George spoke softly about the routines they had developed over decades, emphasizing consistency, attentiveness, and the unspoken bonds that come from patience and mutual respect. And Helen added gentle anecdotes about small acts of kindness that had rippled through their lives in ways Samantha had never considered, highlighting the impact of thoughtful behavior over time. And as Samantha absorbed these lessons, she began to see parallels in her own interactions, recognizing moments when she had acted out of haste, self-interest, or superficial judgment. And a sense of humility settled over her, tempered by a growing appreciation for the depth of character displayed by the couple. And she found herself asking questions, genuinely curious about their perspectives, their choices, and the reasons behind their calm and measured approach to life and family. And Helen responded with patience and warmth, guiding the conversation without imposing conclusions, while George offered insights drawn from lived experience, illustrating the value of quiet consistency and empathetic observation. And Samantha felt a subtle shift in her awareness, and understanding that these lessons were not merely about behavior, but about perception, empathy, and the deliberate cultivation of meaningful connections. And the room seemed to hold a gentle energy, the kind that encourages contemplation and careful listening, with sunlight fading softly through the windows, casting elongated shadows that mirrored the introspective mood. And Samantha found herself reflecting on past decisions, the small judgments and overlooked opportunities for kindness, and she realized that this moment, though orchestrated, had become a powerful mirror for self-assessment and growth. And Helen and George continued their quiet orchestration, allowing Samantha to draw conclusions on her own while modeling the very principles they sought to impart, demonstrating that wisdom, empathy, and thoughtfulness often speak louder in subtle action than in words. And as evening approached, the atmosphere remained calm yet charged with insight, leaving Samantha with a profound sense of awareness, a renewed appreciation for intentional behavior, and a desire to carry these lessons forward in her life, understanding that genuine connection is nurtured through patience, attentiveness, and a consistent commitment to thoughtful engagement. As the evening light softened, Samantha found herself sitting closer to Helen and George, the warmth of the room enveloping her in a sense of safety and openness. And as they spoke about the small details of daily life, from the careful way Helen tended to her garden to the quiet routines George followed in maintaining the home, Samantha began to understand the significance of these ordinary actions, realizing that they were reflections of consistency, care, and thoughtfulness that often went unnoticed but carried deep meaning. And she reflected on how she had previously overlooked such efforts, dismissing them as trivial or unremarkable, and now recognized their value in shaping and nurturing an harmonious environment. And Helen shared gentle observations about the way people respond to challenges and opportunities for empathy, illustrating with simple anecdotes from their past that highlighted the importance of patience and attentive presence. And George reinforced these lessons by recounting how steady guidance and support had influenced not only their own relationship but the broader family, teaching lessons that were absorbed quietly yet profoundly over time. And Samantha listened intently, absorbing the nuance and depth behind each word, each gesture, each carefully arranged detail in the room. And she could feel her perspective shifting, understanding that true influence often came from consistent, subtle action rather than overt instruction. And she thought about her own interactions, recognizing moments where she had failed to notice the efforts and intentions of others, leading to misunderstandings and missed opportunities for connection. And as Helen offered a cup of tea and George adjusted a cushion nearby, Samantha observed the unspoken communication between the couple, a harmony born of shared experience and mutual respect. And she felt a growing sense of appreciation and introspection, realizing that this quiet, deliberate environment was allowing her to process not only her own behaviors, but also the underlying values that guided the couple. And with each passing moment, the conversation deepened, weaving lessons of empathy, mindfulness, and reflective awareness seamlessly into the fabric of their interaction, creating a space where Samantha could safely confront her own assumptions and habits without fear of judgment. And the calm, steady rhythm of the household, combined with the gentle guidance of Helen and George, fostered a sense of clarity and insight, allowing her to see patterns of behavior, moments of oversight, and opportunities for growth. And by the time the sun had fully set, leaving a soft glow through the windows, Samantha felt a renewed sense of understanding, a growing respect for the couple's wisdom, and a quiet determination to carry these reflections forward, appreciating the power of thoughtful observation, patient guidance, and the subtle, profound impact of living intentionally with awareness and empathy. As the evening deepened and the sky outside shifted to soft shades of twilight, Samantha continued to absorb the subtle lessons Helen and George had been presenting, her attention drawn to the careful, deliberate way they moved about the living room, each action imbued with purpose and quiet care, and she began to appreciate the thoughtfulness in the placement of every object, the gentle flow of conversation, and the unobtrusive guidance that had encouraged her to reflect on her own behavior and choices. And Helen spoke of the importance of consistency and attentiveness, illustrating with small anecdotes about neighbors and family members, the kind of stories that revealed the ripple effect of small acts of consideration. And George added his perspective, noting how awareness of others' feelings and thoughtful observation could prevent misunderstandings and build stronger connections over time. And Samantha found herself nodding subtly, realizing that she had often overlooked these small but meaningful details in her own life. Her previous impatience and self-interest now contrasted sharply with the quiet wisdom she was witnessing, and the room, bathed in the soft glow of evening light, felt like a space suspended from the usual pace of the world, where reflection, learning, and gentle understanding could unfold naturally. And as she engaged further, Samantha noticed the interplay of nonverbal cues, the careful expressions, the way Helen and George anticipated each other's thoughts and movements, demonstrating a harmony born of experience and mutual respect, and she began to see how these patterns could be applied not only to family life, but to her own interactions outside the home. And Helen suggested small exercises in observation and consideration, inviting Samantha to participate in noticing details, offering quiet insights, and responding thoughtfully. And as Samantha practiced these small attentions, she felt a growing sense of connection and understanding, recognizing the difference between reactive judgment and considered response, and the gentle rhythm of conversation, the soft sounds of household activity, and the warm ambience all contributed to a profound sense of learning, where actions spoke as loudly as words. And Samantha found herself reflecting on past mistakes, appreciating the couple's patience and intentionality, and realizing that the experience was providing her with tools to foster empathy, mindfulness, and thoughtful engagement in her daily life. And by the time the first stars appeared in the sky, she felt a quiet transformation taking root, a combination of awareness, respect, and curiosity that promised to influence her future actions, while Helen and George observed with gentle satisfaction, allowing her to internalize the lessons at her own pace, demonstrating the enduring power of thoughtful guidance, subtle influence, and the deep, meaningful connections that arise from consistent, intentional care. As night fully settled over the neighborhood and the last traces of daylight faded, Samantha sat quietly with Helen and George, reflecting on the entire experience with a sense of calm she had not anticipated, and she began to realize that the lessons of the day extended far beyond the immediate situation, touching on the importance of mindfulness, observation, and genuine care in all relationships. And Helen spoke softly about how small, intentional actions accumulate over time to shape character and build trust, while George added reflections on the significance of patience, understanding, and the subtle power of guiding others through example rather than directive. And Samantha absorbed these words with growing clarity, considering her own past choices, the moments of impatience, oversight, or self-interest that had caused friction or misunderstanding in her relationships, and she felt a mix of humility and appreciation, recognizing that the couple had created a scenario that allowed her to witness and internalize these principles in a tangible, memorable way. And as they moved through the quiet routines of the evening, from arranging small items to preparing a modest snack, Samantha observed how each act carried meaning, reinforcing lessons of attentiveness, care, and reflection, and she noted the seamless way Helen and George supported each other, their interaction a model of cooperation and mutual respect. And as conversation drifted to shared memories and gentle humor, Samantha found herself smiling genuinely, a lightness, replacing the tension she had felt earlier, and she realized that the experience had opened a new perspective on family, empathy, and her own approach to relationships, and Helen offered quiet guidance through questions that encouraged introspection rather than judgment, while George provided insights drawn from years of observation and understanding. And Samantha felt increasingly confident in her ability to act with thoughtfulness and awareness in the future, recognizing that these qualities required consistent attention and care. And as the stars appeared through the windows, casting a soft glow across the living room, she felt a sense of completion and possibility, understanding that while the evening had provided immediate lessons, the true impact would unfold over time as she applied them to her interactions and decisions. And Helen and George watched with quiet satisfaction, their calm presence reinforcing the value of patience, observation, and deliberate action, and Samantha, left with a renewed sense of responsibility, empathy, and insight, carrying with her the subtle but powerful understanding that meaningful change often begins with small, thoughtful acts and the consistent cultivation of awareness and consideration in every aspect of life, ensuring that the lessons of this night would resonate long after she had stepped back into the wider world.